Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. As promised last week or week before last, I'm not sure, we're going to continue looking at listening to getting some knowledge about Islam in West Africa in particular. Oftentimes we get so focused on South Asia and the Arab world, we forget that the millions, the hundreds of millions of other Muslims who live out there. And I have with me again Dr. Bilal Ware, who wrote the Walking Quran. And for many, that's a peculiar title. He is a professor at University of California. Which one?
Santa Barbara.
Santa Barbara.
Correct.
I'm just having, anything that's in California where it's warm, I don't want to remember.
Just block it out.
And he teaches Islamic and African studies along with African American studies. Also with us this evening is Dr. Babacar Mbengue, who is a native of Senegal, and he teaches Islamic history, something in African American studies, and African studies. So I think we're going to have a lively conversation tonight, because if you haven't read the Walking Quran, please, as I asked you before, pick it up. I think some of the things will make you make an O with your mouth, like, really? Oh my goodness. Other things you're saying, well, then why are all these myths in constant use when there is a truth to be found? And I thought it would be fun because I heard them before the program started. They wanted to shut me off, so they started speaking Wolof. But that's okay. We will do it again just because it's a language unknown by many of our listeners here. So, gentlemen, I don't know if you know each other. Do you know each other?
We were sorry. We were actually discussing that in Wolof. We did meet once at an event. Okay, back at Northwestern University, back when I used to teach there. And I was literally just thinking when you were speaking, Dr. Aminah, all of Nyainana Joe Bahul. So Wolof people say that it's bad to talk behind somebody's back. So speaking in another language that they don't understand when they're present is talking behind somebody's back. So we were being uncourteous. So we beg your pardon. I get few opportunities out here in Santa Barbara to speak Wolof, so I was.
Well, you know what it was you all were not behind my back. I was looking right at you, getting ready to smack you. So it's okay. It's okay. But I can imagine, and the inability, because I've been in places where I have no clue about the language, and to seek a way to speak English or French or something that you know a little bit about becomes
Yep. Well, so can I say something actually on this particular point, and bring in Professor Mbengue as well, because this is one of the things that I tell my graduate students all the time, is that we have to go beyond the colonial archive of African history, and you can't do that speaking European languages. You really have to learn African languages. You have to learn African systems of thought and cultural idioms. And the way that I usually say it is, we're often taught to try to read colonial sources against the grain, and that we're going to somehow get out African stories from inside colonial archives. And I've never believed that. I'm just going to be blunt about that. And the reason is that I think that you can get it to a colonial archive to tell you a story that it doesn't want to tell you. I do think you can get it to tell you a story it doesn't want, but you can't get it to tell you a story that it doesn't know. You can't get it to tell you a story that it can't record because it didn't speak the language. You can't get it to tell you a story that it never wrote down because it was framed in narrative conventions or in ontological categories that the colonialists couldn't think in. right? So they wouldn't have written it down even if they heard it. And so if we just are trying to rework European perspectives in order to get to African truths, we're going to keep falling short of the mark. So African linguistic, cultural, epistemological registers, like that's how we really get free, and make scholarship an act of resistance rather than just reproducing colonial categories. Professor Bang, I was curious what your thoughts were.
No, absolutely. I think the points you make, by the way, it's really an honor to share this platform with both of you, two eminent scholars, and to reinforce some of the point that you already made, which is basically that that need to actually um, uh, explore in history based on its own terms, which is basically that need to use the language of the place to in order to understand the perspective and make sense of the whole dynamics. And I think you do that very well in your work. The working Quran, in the sense that it actually trail a whole new path as far as understanding African history in its own term. In the sense that it actually offer a new perspective that is based on local understanding and local dynamics that in large part are very, offer a very refreshing take on African history and Islamic history overall. So that.
Well, you know what? One of the things that they're pushing for Muslim students in graduate schools is, well, I want to work with West Africa. Oh, and I'm taking Arabic, and I'm saying why? I mean, why would you do that? You're never going to get on the ground with the people doing Arabic. You're going to get, it would be the same as getting a British view or a French view of what happened in West Africa. There would be a little difference, but I want to get to this book. And as I was telling Dr. Bilal earlier, I have so many questions. And he said, just start anywhere and we'll go. So let me start with Islam coming to West Africa.
Mm-hmm.
How does it get there? How does it take on, or does it take on, or does it become synchronized with African traditional religions?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is the in chapter 2 of the Walking Quran, I really try to address this, most directly. And the short version that I'll say is this. There's a lot of misconceptions, especially circulating in the kind of broader, often in the Afrocentric community, just in the kind of society at large, that represents the spread of Islam to sub-Saharan Africa as some kind of imperialist expansion analogous to European colonial expansion. Nothing could be further from the truth. There is no military conquest that establishes Islam in sub-Saharan Africa, period, full stop. So that's the first thing to understand. It is the jihad of the wooden board, those wooden boards on which students learn Quran. That's what spreads Islam in sub-Saharan Africa. So it first comes in the person of merchants across trading networks that are being reinvigorated with the Arab conquest of Northwest Africa. But there is no army that's capable of marching across the Sahara and encountering the Empire of Ghana on a battlefield. Al-Bakri, an 11th century source, says that the Emperor of Ghana can put 200,000 soldiers in the field, 40,000 of them archers. So there's no raggedy army that's going to come out of the Saharan desert and then stand up against the Emperor of Ghana. So instead, what happens is merchants reinvigorate this connection, and scholars follow soon behind them. And in West African societies themselves, first merchants and then an indigenous clerical class arise. They're known by different names in different places, but these are essentially often referred to as the Jula on one hand and Jahanke on the other. These are people who specialize in commerce and have adopted Muslim identity, and another group that have specialized in Islamic knowledge. And I focus on that latter group. And it's actually indigenous West African families that begin to spread throughout the region and teach Islam to other Black folks, right? So it's really this kind of proselytizing effort that transforms the region. That's how Islam actually spreads in sub-Saharan Africa, in contradistinction to what are sometimes referred to as the heartlands of Islam, where it's a military conquest and there's an establishment of a political structure that then leads to conversion after that. Quite the opposite. In fact, in the early period, both in the Senegal River Valley and also in what eventually becomes the Empire of Ghana, it's likely that there's a significant conversion of indigenous populations even before the rulers accept Islam.
Right.
So it's a bottom-up conversion rather than a top-down. And Professor Mbengue is equally qualified to amplify on this, so I'd love to hear him go in as well.
No. I mean, absolutely, I agree on pretty much all the points you make regarding the establishment of Islam. Islam, obviously, in sub-Saharan Africa, in what actually came to be known as the Sudan, as you aptly say, was a something put in place by a dedicated class of scholars, the ulama, and obviously it has always be at the forefront of Islamization. And obviously this Islamization happened through proximity, that is interpersonal relationship. And it is therefore something that actually have been deeply entrenched, within the African, West African tradition, and came to actually embody what it means basically to be African. I mean, a very important point that actually have been, I think, nicely developed in your book. So
yeah, and thank you for saying that, because that was really the other part of Dr. Aminah's question, and that's exactly it. It's people often represent it as a kind of juxtaposition, as though one can't be authentically African and authentically Muslim at the same time. What happens, and because of the way it unfolds in West Africa, it becomes really impossible to be authentically African because a lot of people don't understand that scholarly class. Yes, they're reading and writing Arabic, but they're often reading and writing African languages with the Arabic script. They're often the people that are responsible for the first time in writing down poetry that is the inherited cultural tradition of the societies in which they're embedded. They write it down for the first time. These are cultural experts. They're not people that are alienated from their own societies. They're not people that have inherited an inferiority complex vis-a-vis Arabs because they didn't know no Arabs. The real interaction was one between classical texts and an African society that interpreted them, made them organic, and then learned how to create a society that was living, as Dr. Mbengue said, an embodied expression of both Africanness and Islam.
Well, one of the things that I can't say is funny, but I've always gotten a kick out of it, is now that Dr. Babacar is the father of 2 sets of twins. It's like, when do you get that memorization in, dude? And he would say, well, I get up in the morning before Fajr. And I said, well, you just went to bed before Fajr. So how does one get to it? And the walking Quran, I think, is emblematic of another way, not the Arab way, but another way of taking seriously how the Quran can change one's moral seating, one's, social persona, so to speak. So let's go to the walking Quran. I went to the madrasa as an older person and had to convince them to take me in, which they weren't happy about at all. But that's okay. We worked that out. And they weren't happy about taking a woman in either. But that's okay. We worked all of that out. And I hated it. I mean, it was too hard for me. I just can't. I mean, it's not only rote learning, it changes lots of things about you. So either one of you want to talk, or let's wait a minute, let me go back and ask, what made you want to turn this is a part of your dissertation into a book, and why go to Senegal?
So this is I'll try to answer both questions at the same time. So the first thing, well, why Senegal? The answer to that is Cheikh Anta Diop. Okay, I read Cheikh Anta Diop's African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality when I was a minor league baseball player, 20-year-old kid on a 16-hour bus ride. And this book, it opened my eyes. I literally quit the team at the end of the season and I said, I'm going back to school. I'm gonna study African history. I had never heard of African history before that in any serious way. So it was good. I knew I wanted to go to Africa, and Senegal was gonna ultimately be the place. Now, when I started engaging Senegalese societies, I was actually mostly interested in political history. I was interested in Pan-African intellectual history, but I saw how deeply rooted Islam was in this place. And I had converted to Islam when I was 15 years old, but I really didn't go to Senegal to learn about Islam. I went to Senegal to learn about Africa. And what I found was that the society incorporated Islam so authentically and naturally in just the expression of decency and cultural morality that I just wanted to understand that better. And the people kept telling me that the most fundamental thing for rooting Muslim identity, as I was seeing it expressed, was Quran school. So when I first was encountering Quran school, it looked strange to me. Like, the children begging door to door. There was, oftentimes stories about corporal punishment of children, all kinds of things that didn't look like education from where I was coming from. But they say in Wolof, which means if you see something, there's a reason for it, right? So if people have been persisting in this way of raising their children, it's doing something. So I wanted to try to understand the deeper logic behind a bunch of things that didn't necessarily make sense to me at first sight. Like you said, it's hard. But what I found ultimately was that what was holding together all of these different things that were hard to understand from the outside was a particular conception of what a human being is and how you transform a human being into somebody that functions in their society in a moral and ethical and spiritual way. And that's what was really being transmitted through traditional Quranic education. And so once I understood that, and I will just say one thing, you said not the Arab way, not the current Arab way, but the original. The original Islamic way. The original Islamic way was to teach the whole of a person, and Africans held on to that, while other countries and other places were starting to make their schools look like white people's schools. All of the things that were alienating to me in Quran schooling in West Africa were precisely because they were still things done the way that the Prophet, peace be upon him, had done them. Right? So I knew I had to think differently about what knowledge was and how it was being transmitted through schooling.
Dr. Mbengue.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I see myself in many of Dr. Ware's writing. I mean, I can give very anecdotally a personal story. I mean, my father came of age at a time when French colonization was pretty much at its highest point, in the early 1920s. I mean, late 1920s. But he was telling us that at some point he actually wanted to go to French school. And obviously my grandfather, as a cleric, somebody who actually was very much grounded in this tradition that Dr. Ware is describing, was taken aback by that assertion. And what he decided right away was, well, I'll send you rather to Koki. Koki obviously is in the middle of Senegal. As a native of Senegal, that was actually a way to expand on the tradition that is very much established of first making sure that the individual is familiarized with Quran, but also given the tools to navigate within a society that is deeply grounded within the Islamic tradition. So from that perspective, I think my father also did want to expand that tradition by taking us very early on to a Quranic school. So at the age of 3, I was sent to a Quran school. The difference is, unlike my father who went to a dara, with a full board, I actually had the fortune, the good fortune of living next door to somebody who actually give us the benefit of being trained in the traditional way without necessarily being full board. So I associated these two type of education, which is later on joining the French school, yet at the same time continuing the Quranic school. And you know that within that Quranic school, not only are you taught the Quran, but you're given the tools. That is, for example, what is called the adab, the way to interact with your milieu, your environment, the right way to be in society, but also your duties toward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a very established tradition within African tradition, especially West African tradition, whereby the Quran is an Islamic tradition, education is part and parcel of the identity of what it means to be a human, whereby you are given the skills to navigate your society in a manner that is basically in adequation with the Quranic Islamic ideals or principles.
I'm just, oh, my notebook is going to be so full. I am just learning and learning and learning. And I want to just I know that Dr. Bilal has to go, but so I'm going to cut my breaks down. I'm going to take a 1.5 minute break right now. But I want to come back and talk about the actual process of learning and ingesting and, being a walking Quran. We'll be right back. This is Dr. Aminah Al-Deen, and I am just a student in the school of Dr. Bilal Ware and Dr. Babacar and Mbengue, and I am having a ball. We're being followed in Senegal, and I'm loving that too. We'll be right back. Assalamu alaikum. This is Dr. Aminah Al-Deen for Muslim Network TV on the program Critical Talk. And I am speaking with, actually, I'm listening to Dr. Bilal Ware and Dr. Babacar and Mbengue, and we're talking about the madrasa in West Africa, but also West African modes of learning the Quran. And right before our break, I asked both of them let's talk about this walking Quran. What is Quran school like? Are the kids really getting beat? Although I had some I wish to beat. Are the kids, why are they begging? Are they being taught, in addition to the fact that you have to go get what you need, some humility and humbleness? I mean, there are layers and layers of stuff that most of the writings we read about only touch the surface.
Indeed. I mean, I would begin the answer in this way. Not only is what's called yalwan usually, which is the seeking of alms. I never call it begging. It's seeking alms, because it's a reminder that there's two parts in the affair. There's actually, the role of alms in West African society is extremely important. Constant expiation of sin, communal responsibility for those children and teachers in the community who are fulfilling a fard kifaya for the community. That as long as there are people in the society that are preoccupying themselves with the learning and the teaching of the Quran, it is not incumbent upon every individual as a fard ayn to teach whatever they know of the Quran. So there's this understanding that these are our kids, we have to take care of them. And in most instances, kids don't pay any tuition for those boarding schools. Teachers live just from gifts. So there's a very, very different kind of communal economic model that drove it traditionally. Now, in the recent past, there have been people that have exploited this and made it an exploitative institution, but it has, sort of sound roots. With respect to corporal punishment, spare the rod, spoil the child was was certainly how I was raised, and I feel like, especially with respect to male children, that is the general line of thinking in Senegambian society as well. Which a child doesn't know who God is, but he knows the lash. so in other words, you can rectify, wayward behavior with a little discipline. Mentioning the name of God won't do it by itself. So all I'll say on that point is that in societies that know corporal punishment, there's a line between corporal punishment and abuse. In other words, there are culturally defined appropriate norms for what constitutes physical discipline as opposed to adults beating children, right? And so I think that one of the things that I wanted to do was actually be attentive to how those norms were constructed in Senegambian society rather than trying to impose them from the outside. But underlying both of the things, corporal punishment and the seeking of alms, was the cultivation of postures of humility before the word, and going through a kind of initiatory stage in life that would prepare you to face hardships later on in life, that would create a kind of resourcefulness in you. And there was a wonderful sociologist, Sokhna Jufai, who did an excellent thesis that showed how the data networks of the Muridiyya produced incredibly powerful social and economic bonds that literally led to lifetime success for people that had never done any formal state education. They had only grown up in Quran schools together, but the skill set that they learned, the social relationships that they developed, set them up to be successful entrepreneurs. And I always tell people, look, if you wanted to test the truth of this, next time you're in one of the big market stalls in downtown Dakar, buy something and then watch the way that it's written into the register by the person who's writing down the sale. 9 times out of 10, they're going to be writing from right to left, not from left to right. They're going to be writing, in Arabic or in Wolof, because that's their primary education. A lot of the most successful merchants and other business people are people that really didn't get any other kind of training except this one. So it works. Yeah.
There you go. So, Dr. Mbengue, tell me about ingesting the Quran.
No, just to expand on Dr. Ware's point, there is here the understanding that, the Quran, it is not just about memorizing. It is about building a certain personality with desirable traits such as, humility, but also the ability to be someone who can live regardless of the surrounding circumstances. So it is likely that, those who actually are a product of these educational system that Dr. Ware is describing will be people who actually can be at ease regardless of whichever circumstance they find themselves in, because they've been really trained to actually face the most difficult of the circumstances and not be phased out by anything that is basically otherwise deemed as challenge or basically obstacle. So they are. This is a system that is meant to basically create an individual, if you want, group that actually are flexible, but also very much aware of what it means to actually be, in line with their tradition, with basically what represent Islamic ideals.
I want to. Oh, sorry. Pardon me.
Yeah,
no, I was just very. Well, I heard literally exactly this from probably a dozen different people that I interviewed. That were almost always the same wording. In other words, wherever you might end up, you can be there and you can handle yourself. Right? Whatever you may face, you're prepared for it.
Wow.
And Dr. Aminah, just with respect to one thing that we were talking about before we got on the air, I actually make the argument, I'm not sure where in the Walking Quran anymore I said this, but I said the ultimate vindication of this methodology of schooling is actually proven by the trauma of the Atlantic slave trade. Because we have partial copies of the Quran that are written out by memory, lasting stories that echo through history of Umar ibn Said in North Carolina, of Abdurrahman ibn Suri in Mississippi, who changed history in spite of the fact that they were enslaved. Right? That the ultimate vindication of this method of schooling is that somebody can strip you naked, put you in the hold of a slave ship, send you 5,000 miles away from everything that you've ever known, but they cannot take the book from you if you have become the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you can recreate it in any environment.
Yes. Yes. That was why it's so interesting how you describe the washing of the board and ingesting the water. You know, I mean, you got it. Nobody can take that. It's in yourselves, and I wanted to, so much in that book. Okay. How do we, because I know that there's a student listening. I haven't seen her on our comments, but she wants to go and look at Medina Bay. How are these American kids inculcated with another cultural position?
Yeah. So the community, so the first thing to say about the community in Medina Bay, in Kaolack, established by Sheikh al-Islam Ibrahim Yas, originally in the 1930s, this community becomes established. Sheikh Hassan Sise, may God be well pleased with him, in the 1980s, really developed this profound connection with African-American culture, and did amazing proselytizing work in New York, in Chicago, in Detroit, really spread the branch of the Tijaniya of Banyas to African-American communities. And he created something called the African-American Islamic Institute in Medina Bay and Kaolack. So there's been a pipeline and a channel for especially African-American kids to come over, study the Quran, study the traditional Islamic sciences, learn the Wolof language. This has been an open and lively, field for cultural exchange. I did an event the other night with a friend of mine, African-American brother, Ibrahim Kafani Sise. Kafani lived in Senegal for 15 years, memorized the Quran there, studied the Islamic sciences there. So there's like this enclave now in the city of Kaolack, and where you can actually speak English in the streets, because there's enough African Americans and then also Nigerians and Ghanaians that have come, because many of the disciples of Sheikh Ibrahim were from Anglophone Africa as well. That's opened up this kind of pocket, essentially, and many people spend a number of years there, or send their children for a certain amount of time to keep that bridge that Sheikh Hassan established open. And it's a beautiful and extraordinary achievement of Pan-Africanism, if nothing else, right? It's this reuniting that which the slave trade rent asunder. and I mean, I've had the blessing and opportunity, to spend a good amount of time, around that community. Touba was my research home for my PhD research, but afterwards, since the late 2000s, I've spent a good amount of time in Medina Bay as well, and it's a beautiful thing.
So my last question, because I know everybody has to go and pray,
Yep.
is how do we balance the need for those who are able, to continue to become walking Qurans in a world where there's robotics and there's IT stuff and people need to have jobs to support families? How do we do that?
I'd love to hear from my colleague first, and then I'll wrap it up after that and get ready to go make salat, inshallah.
No, I mean, absolutely. I think there was a novel that actually was written in Senegal, and I think the novel was quoted by Dr. Ware, which is called L'Aventure Ambiguë, which is a...
Can you repeat that again?
Ambiguous adventure.
Ambiguous adventure by someone called Cheikh Hamidou Kane. So in this novel, the main character is somebody who started out, with the traditional Islamic training. So had the Quran and all of the traditional schooling, and ultimately ended up in Europe basically to acquire Western education. And one of the points that he made was basically, I came here to learn how to vanquish without being right, meaning how to be on top without being right. So basically here, there is that understanding that, well, you can reconcile this type of true tradition by grounding yourself within the tradition early on, yet acquiring those tools that are needed to actually live in a modern world, to actually interact in a modern world. So it's well understood among many African, and I think Professor Ware made that very clearly in his book, that, well, it is well understood that there are avenues, there are ways to basically successfully reconcile this traditional education, from Africa with the modern form of education. One doesn't necessarily exclude the other.
Absolutely, and I would amplify by saying, this is going to be an odd pairing, because first I'll quote Senghor and then I'll quote Cheikh Anta Diop. So Senghor, poet, first president of Senegal, the way that he often framed this was assimiler pour ne pas être assimilé. Right? In other words, you assimilate the other society so that you're not assimilated to it.
Right.
So that to me is the key, and this is where I want to mention Cheikh Anta Diop, who was my inspiration for studying African history in the first place. One of the things I was most astonished by in his corpus of work was that he wrote this lengthy, I think in one form it's like a 70 or 80 page published piece called Comment enraciner la science en Afrique, how to enroot science in Africa. And in it, he translates Einstein's theory of relativity into the Wolof language using no loan words from any European language.
Really?
Yes. The entirety of it, right? And his point was actually part of an argument with Senghor, who said what he said, but was really very much about assimilating to French culture. And Senghor was trying to basically remove African language education from the state system. And Cheikh Anta Diop wanted to prove a point, which is that there is no kind of modern scientific information that cannot be communicated through African cultural forms. And the place, people often forget this and don't understand this about Cheikh Anta Diop, really the founder in many ways of modern Afrocentrism in its modern expression, is that he was raised in the Tariqa Muridiyya. He was raised in Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba's community. He is named after one of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba's brothers. What Cheikh Anta Diop learned in Murid Quran schools was when you study the Quran on one side of the tablet, you turn it over and you study Ahmadu Bamba's poetry on the other. You write the Wolof language with the Arabic script. So he knew from head to foot that there was no need for any kind of cultural inferiority complex.
Right.
Sheikh Ahmadu Bamba had already shown a whole community that one could assimilate the entire corpus of Islamic knowledge to Black cultural imperatives, and it would go. So he didn't have any concerns about doing likewise with European examples. And that's my whole focus in writing the Walking Quran, and really in everything that I do, is that until we understand and valorize our own African ontological and epistemological systems, we have no way of resisting this. And here's the thing, we will never be as good at being Europeans as they are. Isn't that what Du Bois said? Always measuring your own soul by somebody else's hate. And here's the other thing, is if we could, would we want to? In other words, do we want to ingest these poisons that come with turning the whole world into a toxic environment, creating selfish individualism throughout every corner of the globe? Or do we want to return to these traditional epistemological and ontological orientations and instead now bring in the benefits of modern science technology to our traditional approach? And that's what I'm trying to argue for in the Walking Quran and in so many other things that I write and do.
But you know, Dr. Bilal owes me one more session.
Let's do it.
So don't look like you don't remember.
I remember. I said let's do it.
And Dr. Babacar will give me an additional session, and I want to go to. And in the meantime, I want you all to the best of your ability on the fly to talk about that epistemological seating. Because I know we don't know, and we read the Walking Quran, and after you get over awe, you can't dig any further because you don't have the tools. So right now I'm going to give you a minute to end our session with each other and Wolof. So both of you get a little chance to do that, and then we're going to come back to me. And you're facing me, so you don't have your backs to me talking about me.
No, no, I won't talk behind your back that way. I'll just respond to your call in the following fashion. I would end this conversation where I began it, which is that I don't believe that decolonization is truly a possibility. There's no undoing what was done, but I do think that we need to. Sankofa, we need to go backwards in order to move forwards. We need to root ourselves, as Jahanke and other scholars do, in the epistemologies of ancient Egypt, right? We need to enroot ourselves in our own African traditions and chart a new way forward that is based on our understandings. And that means getting up, it means traveling, it means spending time, reconnecting. It means building those connections that the slave trade broke. Because that's the other part that I'll say about this, is that living, in Senegal, spending, probably I would say about 4 years out of the last 20 of my life there, and constantly going back and forth, is that it changes the way in which you approach this oppressive environment to be re-socialized again in a context that never experienced it, right? It gives you a different perspective on how to be authentically you, rather than just being a product of American oppression. Yeah. That's it.
Dr. Mbengue, I'm going to give you the last word.
I would just go to point made by Dr. Ware, especially in his important book, to just reiterate the fact that his book, in many ways, has opened a whole new trail and a whole new way to consider what it means to know, what it means to understand Islam. That far, goes beyond Africa alone, in the sense that he is trying to restore a certain way of understanding, a certain epistemology, as what I see, that actually have been lost, in many other parts of the world. So I think it is actually one of the important aspects of this book. There are many other important aspects, obviously. And I think for those reasons, this is a book that actually would really start a whole new forms of a conversation when it comes to, for example,
Yes.
what it means to be someone who knows, and what it means to be someone grounded in knowledge, and what is knowledge in the first place. So I think I would recommend the books to all those who actually want to understand the history of Islam in Africa, because it actually provides insight that actually far exceed, go beyond the region. And I personally, I've seen myself, in many of the way he described Islam, and the example that he provides. So a very well recommended reading for anybody, interested in Islam and the world we live in today.
Absolutely. And I can't tell, I'm always learning, and this is just exciting. And I see our Senegalese friends following the conversation. This is just wonderful. And I will get back to both of you personally. This is Dr. Aminah Al-Deen for Muslim Network TV and Critical Talk. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you guys. That was great.